Welcome, beautiful Sigma ladies. Power doesn't always roar. It often whispers, and those who can't hear it are the first to be destroyed by it. Throughout history, studies in psychology show that over 70% of people unconsciously gravitate toward dominance hierarchies. They cling to titles, power roles, and attention games like their very survival depends on it. But here's the twist. Sigma females don't play that game. They walk through life dismantling these fragile personalities without even trying, and the destruction is often brutal, silent, and permanent. The personality type that finds itself in their path doesn't just lose, it unravels. Piece by piece, the carefully constructed identity of control, ego, and attention hunger collapses like a sandcastle meeting the tide. It's not rage, it's not revenge. It's the quiet force of someone who lives outside the system, and that's precisely what makes her lethal to those who can't exist without it. And here's the funny part. Sigma females don't even wake up thinking, who am I going to destroy today? They just exist. Their independence, their refusal to clap for cheap performances, their disinterest in the spotlight, it's enough to make the pretenders, manipulators, and narcissists implode on their own. This isn't about drama, it's about inevitability. When a Sigma female enters the picture, the one personality type that thrives on control and attention simply cannot survive her silence, her authenticity, and her refusal to be chained. What follows is a slow but guaranteed destruction, and she doesn't even break a sweat doing it. Number 1. The identity thief loses when faced with her authenticity. The identity thief is one of the easiest targets for a Sigma female to destroy, and it happens almost without her trying. This type of person survives by studying others, borrowing personalities, and shaping themselves into whatever mask seems most accepted at the moment. They're the chameleons who thrive on imitation because deep down, they don't know who they really are. But when they encounter a Sigma female, the entire game falls apart. Her authenticity is so unshakable, so raw, and so unapologetically unique that any attempt to copy her looks pathetic and forced. She's not playing a role, she's living her truth. And there's nothing more painful for an imitator than to stand next to the original when all they have is a poor counterfeit. What makes it worse for them is that Sigma females never even compete. They don't flaunt their individuality, they don't beg to be noticed, and they don't need validation. That's precisely what makes their presence unbearable to someone who feeds on imitation. The copycat suddenly realizes that no matter how much they mimic her words, style, or even energy, it never lands the same. It's like trying to forge a signature while the real artist is standing in the room. It instantly exposes the fraud. And here's the brutal truth. Sigma females don't even confront these people directly. They don't need to call them out. They simply keep being themselves. And the contrast does all the damage. People notice. The room can tell who's authentic and who's just wearing a mask. The identity thief starts to look desperate, awkward, and irrelevant without the Sigma ever lifting a finger against them. The destruction is slow but humiliating. The imitator loses credibility. They lose respect. And worst of all, they lose the false confidence they built on other people's backs. They're forced to face the terrifying emptiness of not having a self to return to. That's why Sigma females always end up destroying this type without effort. Their very existence is a reminder that real power comes from within, and no amount of stolen traits or borrowed masks can ever compete with someone who is unapologetically themselves. Number 2. The pretender alpha doesn't survive her silence. The pretender alpha depends on an audience. His sense of self, his confidence, and his perceived dominance all hinge on being noticed, admired, and validated. Every gesture, every word, every display of power is calculated to elicit a reaction. He doesn't exist without spectators, and he certainly doesn't thrive in silence. But the Sigma female doesn't play the role of audience. She doesn't applaud, she doesn't react, and she doesn't feed his performance in any way. Her silence is not passive, it's a force that slowly dismantles the very foundation of his identity. At first he may escalate, trying louder displays, sharper gestures, or more elaborate performances to force a reaction. But she doesn't respond. Her attention cannot be bought, coerced, or manipulated. Each failed attempt chips away at the carefully constructed persona he has built, revealing the hollowness beneath the surface. Without her engagement, the act that sustains him begins to feel empty, absurd, and unsustainable. The destruction is subtle but devastating. He starts questioning his own worth, his relevance, and the efficacy of his dominance. The more he performs, the more exposed he becomes. His energy, previously fueled by admiration, turns inward as doubt, insecurity, and frustration take hold. She doesn't need to speak or confront him. Her refusal to participate in his game is enough to leave him unraveling. In the end, the pretender alpha discovers a harsh truth. Dominance without recognition is meaningless, and validation is a fragile foundation for identity. The Sigma female doesn't destroy him with force, ridicule, or manipulation. She destroys him with the quiet power of indifference. Her silence becomes the mirror he cannot escape, exposing the emptiness of his performance and leaving him to confront the collapse of a self built entirely on others' attention. Number 3. The insecure overcompensator burns out trying to impress her. The insecure overcompensator is someone who constantly feels like they're not enough, and the world, or especially a Sigma female, must be convinced otherwise. Every achievement, every boast, every attempt to dominate a situation is a patch over a deeper void, a loud signal screaming, "Look at me, I matter." But with a Sigma female, none of it lands. She doesn't care about status, trophies, or manufactured dominance. Her attention isn't something you can earn through noise or spectacle. It's a currency that must be genuinely merited. At first, he might think he can impress her with the usual tricks. Big gestures, flashy displays of power, or stories that paint him as indispensable. He escalates, piling one over-the-top performance on top of another, hoping eventually she'll take notice. But she doesn't flinch, she doesn't applaud, and she doesn't engage. That lack of reaction is like a mirror reflecting back the futility of his efforts. Every attempt to inflate himself only exposes the fragility underneath. The real damage isn't verbal or confrontational. It's existential. The overcompensator starts to feel the weight of his own insecurities pressing harder than ever. He's burning through energy, charisma, and patience trying to win approval from someone who isn't playing the same game. Slowly, the act becomes exhausting. And he realizes that all the noise he made to assert importance means nothing here. He's exhausted, transparent, and irrelevant, all without her ever having to say a word. By the time he finally stops, he's spent, diminished, and painfully aware of the gap between his illusions and reality. In the presence of a Sigma female, his overcompensation isn't just ineffective, it's self-destructive. She doesn't destroy him directly. She doesn't even need to. Her indifference, her grounded authenticity, and her refusal to engage with ego-driven theatrics are enough to make him implode. In the end, he is undone not by confrontation, but by the impossibility of impressing someone who cannot be impressed. Number 4. The gaslighter breaks against her unshakable memory. The gaslighter thrives on confusion. His entire strategy depends on bending reality, rewriting history, and making people question their own memories. He builds his power on uncertainty, planting doubt like a slow-acting poison. But the Sigma female is not just resistant to manipulation. She remembers. And she remembers with precision, clarity, and an almost ruthless consistency that leaves no cracks for distortion to creep in. Every attempt he makes to twist the story, to make her question herself, bounces off her like hitting steel. What makes this so devastating is that gaslighters aren't used to resistance. They're used to malleable targets who will accept uncertainty as truth. The Sigma female does not accept it. She doesn't forget, she doesn't rationalize, and she doesn't compromise her perception to make his lies easier to tolerate. Every false narrative he spins is exposed piece by piece by her quiet but unwavering memory. She keeps mental records that are sharp, exact, and immovable, and eventually, the gaslighter finds himself trapped not by confrontation, but by the impossibility of his own manipulation. The irony is that she rarely needs to call him out. Her recollection alone is enough to make his games unravel. Colleagues, friends, or partners start noticing the cracks in his stories. His credibility begins to collapse while she stands apart, calm and untouchable. The more he tries to twist, the harder it becomes for him to maintain the illusion of control. By the time the gaslighter realizes what's happening, he is already on the defensive, scrambling, exposed. His manipulation is useless, his power evaporates, and all the confidence he built on deception comes crashing down. She doesn't need to fight him, argue with him, or even prove anything externally. Her memory, her clarity, and her refusal to be manipulated are enough to make him implode. In the presence of a Sigma female, a gaslighter discovers that reality cannot be bent for everyone, and the one person who remembers everything will always hold the upper hand. She doesn't destroy him with anger or force. She destroys him with truth, quietly, relentlessly, and inescapably. Number 5. She shatters the control freak by refusing his script. The control freak depends on predictability. His entire sense of order, security, and power is built around the belief that life can be choreographed, that people can be guided to move exactly as he plans. He thrives when others follow his scripts, when reactions are predictable, and when chaos is minimized under his watchful control. But the Sigma female doesn't follow scripts. She improvises, she flows, and she exists entirely on her own terms. Her independence and spontaneity render his obsessive need for control meaningless. At first he may try to impose rules, boundaries, and expectations, believing that persistence will eventually bend her to his will. But she doesn't conform. She navigates life in ways he cannot predict or contain, leaving him frustrated and powerless. Every plan he creates, every structure he enforces crumbles in her presence because she doesn't validate it, doesn't adhere to it, and doesn't react according to his expectations. The more he escalates, the more obvious his impotence becomes. His obsession with order, control, and influence, which normally gives him confidence, now highlights his limitations. Her autonomy is a mirror reflecting his futility back at him. He cannot manipulate her compliance, and he cannot script her behavior no matter how hard he tries. She doesn't confront him, argue, or lecture. Her mere refusal to conform is enough to dismantle his sense of authority. In trying to control her, he ends up exposing his own rigidity, dependence on rules, and fear of unpredictability. She teaches him, silently and relentlessly, that true strength lies in freedom and self-possession, not in the illusion of dominance over others. In the end, the control freak is undone not by force, but by impossibility. The Sigma female proves that life cannot be choreographed for someone who refuses to be scripted. She doesn't just ignore his plans, she makes them irrelevant, leaving him to face the uncomfortable truth. Control is only an illusion when someone exists entirely outside it. Number 6. The jealous competitor is neutralized by her lack of competition. The jealous competitor thrives on rivalry. His sense of self is built entirely around comparison, measuring achievements, appearances, influence, or social status against others. Without someone to outshine, undermine, or compete with, he begins to feel unmoored. But the Sigma female doesn't enter life as an opponent or a rival. She doesn't play the game at all. Her goals aren't about beating anyone, proving anything, or climbing social ladders. She exists outside the competition entirely, and that's exactly what makes her devastating to someone whose identity depends on it. At first, he may try to provoke her, to create a sense of challenge, hoping to ignite the sparks of rivalry that validate his existence. But she doesn't respond. Her energy doesn't register as a threat, a competitor, or even an equal to be measured. She moves through life on her own terms, unconcerned with the metrics he worships. Slowly, he begins to realize that the battles he's been waging in his mind, tracking who's ahead, who's better, who's winning, don't exist for her. There's no score to keep, no victory to claim. His whole system of self-validation collapses. This absence of competition is suffocating to him in ways he never anticipated. He becomes obsessed with measuring her, questioning why he can't find a weakness, why her life isn't comparable to his. Every attempt to quantify or compete only highlights his own inadequacies. The Sigma female doesn't need to confront him or engage directly. Her detachment, her indifference to social hierarchies and contests, neutralizes him entirely. By the time he recognizes what's happening, he's trapped in invisible wars, battles that exist only in his own mind. There's no glory, no leverage, no victory to seize, and worst of all, he can't even provoke her into a reaction that would restore his sense of control. In her presence, the jealous competitor's obsession with comparison and validation becomes his undoing. She doesn't destroy him with words, conflict, or confrontation. She destroys him simply by refusing to be a rival, a benchmark, or a competitor at all. Number 7. The control seeker can't trap what won't stay. The control seeker lives for possession. His entire worldview is built on rules, labels, and commitments designed to contain, direct, and predict the behavior of others. He measures success by how much he can dominate, how many boundaries he can enforce, and how tightly he can keep people tethered to his expectations. But the Sigma female doesn't respond to cages. She doesn't bend, she doesn't submit, and she doesn't stay confined for anyone. Her independence is absolute, and that is the one thing he cannot manipulate, bargain for, or control. At first, he may think he can trap her with conventional methods, titles, obligations, or societal expectations. He builds invisible walls, assuming she will eventually bump into them and conform. But she doesn't even acknowledge the barriers he constructs. She moves around them, over them, or straight through them without effort, leaving him frustrated and increasingly desperate. Each attempt to control her only highlights the futility of his efforts. The very tools he relies on to assert dominance become proof of his own impotence. The more he escalates, the more obvious it becomes. Real power cannot exist where freedom is present. He discovers that no matter how carefully he engineers restrictions, she retains the ultimate advantage simply by refusing to stay confined. His obsession with control begins to consume him, draining energy, patience, and ego, while she continues unbothered, untouched, and sovereign in her own right. By the time he realizes the depth of his failure, he's already diminished. His rules and labels mean nothing. His strategies, once so clever, are exposed as weak and irrelevant. She doesn't need to fight him, argue with him, or overpower him. The sheer impossibility of controlling someone who refuses to be trapped dismantles his sense of authority entirely. In the presence of a Sigma female, the control seeker discovers the harsh truth. Domination is an illusion, and freedom is absolute. She doesn't break him with confrontation. She dismantles his world by simply being untouchable, untethered, and unapologetically herself, proving that true power belongs only to those who refuse to be caged. Number 8. The charmer's mask melts when she doesn't care. The charmer thrives on attention and reaction. His identity is crafted like a performance, built from rehearsed lines, smooth gestures, and a constant stream of calculated charisma. He depends on people, especially women, falling for his act, validating his presence, and feeding the ego that his charm sustains. But the Sigma female doesn't react the way he expects. She doesn't swoon, she doesn't play along, and she certainly doesn't reward the performance he has meticulously perfected. Her indifference is a mirror reflecting the emptiness beneath his mask. At first, he may escalate, trying bigger gestures, sharper wit, and more elaborate displays. Each attempt is meant to reel her in, to force the validation he craves. But she remains unshaken, unimpressed, and untouchable. Every line he's practiced for years lands flat. Every trick, every seductive move, every carefully calculated expression is exposed for what it is, rehearsed, hollow, and entirely dependent on others' compliance. What makes it truly devastating is that she doesn't even need to confront him or call him out. Her presence alone unmasks him. She doesn't laugh, flirt, or engage, and in doing so, she reveals the raw truth behind his charm. There is no substance. His identity, once seemingly powerful, begins to unravel as he realizes that his entire persona was a fragile construction, dependent on her reaction to give it meaning. As he struggles to maintain the facade, the cracks widen. The more he tries, the more obvious it becomes that the charm he relies on is not real, and his sense of self begins to collapse under the weight of its own artifice. In the end, he is left exposed, vulnerable, and irrelevant. The Sigma female doesn't destroy him with aggression, ridicule, or confrontation. She destroys him by refusing to care, refusing to participate, and refusing to react. In her presence, the charmer discovers the harshest truth. No act, no performance, and no mask can replace authenticity. And without it, even the most polished charm is meaningless. Number 9. The victim player finds no stage. The victim player thrives on attention, sympathy, and the ability to manipulate others through feigned helplessness. Their entire identity is built around the performance of fragility, crying out, dramatizing, and creating scenarios where they are always the injured party. They rely on others to prop them up, reassure them, and feed their narrative of suffering. But the Sigma female doesn't play along. She has no patience for manufactured weakness, no tolerance for emotional theatrics, and no interest in participating in the game of false vulnerability. At first, the victim player may try to draw her in with stories, tears, or subtle manipulations, expecting her to engage and validate their narrative. But she doesn't react. She doesn't comfort, she doesn't console, and she doesn't acknowledge the performance. Every effort he makes to trigger sympathy bounces off her like a wall. She doesn't need to confront him directly. Her indifference alone exposes the emptiness of his act. What makes her presence so devastating is that she doesn't give him the stage he craves. Without an audience, his performance collapses. The victim player thrives on others' reactions, and when those reactions are denied, he is left with nothing, no validation, no control, and no power. The very tools he relies on to manipulate and dominate emotionally become useless. Slowly, the cracks appear. His dramatics, which once commanded attention, now make him look desperate and pathetic. The more he tries to provoke a response, the more obvious his tactics become, and the harder it is for him to maintain the illusion of fragility. In her presence, he is forced to confront a harsh reality. His entire identity is performative, and without an audience, it has no substance. She doesn't destroy him with confrontation or ridicule. She destroys him with absence, with refusal, and with the unshakable knowledge that fake vulnerability has no power over someone who refuses to participate. In her orbit, the victim player is stripped of his stage, his influence, and his identity, left floundering in a world where his performance no longer works. Number 10. The overly possessive are crushed by her untouchable core. The overly possessive thrive on control, on ownership, and on the illusion that people can be claimed like objects. They measure relationships by access, how much time they get, how much attention they command, how tightly they can bind someone to their will. But the Sigma female exists on a level they cannot touch. They may try to occupy her space, monopolize her time, or demand loyalty, but her essence, her core self, is untouchable. No rules, no labels, no manipulations can reach it. What they think they own is only the surface. The heart of her independence remains completely beyond their grasp. At first, they might believe that control is possible. They escalate jealousy, restrictions, emotional pressure, assuming that persistence will eventually force compliance. But she doesn't bend, negotiate, or comply. Every attempt to cage her only highlights the futility of their obsession. The harder they pull, the more apparent it becomes that the center they wish to control cannot be claimed. Possessiveness, in her presence, feels absurd, like trying to grasp smoke with your hands. The crushing realization for them is subtle but brutal. They are forced to confront the fact that what they want most, complete access and domination, is impossible. They may succeed in capturing moments, appearances, or gestures, but never the essence of who she is. Her freedom, self-possession, and untouchable core strip them of the illusion of power, leaving them frustrated, weak, and ultimately irrelevant. She doesn't need to argue, fight, or prove herself. Her very existence exposes the futility of their possessiveness. The Sigma female teaches them silently and relentlessly that no amount of control or claiming can substitute for the authenticity and independence she embodies. In trying to cage her, they are undone by the one thing they can never reach, her untouchable essence. Their obsession becomes their own undoing, leaving them powerless in the shadow of a woman who cannot be owned. Number 11. The social climber plummets around her. The social climber measures life in rungs, networks, and leverage. He evaluates everyone he meets by how much they can help him ascend, how many connections they offer, and how useful they are in boosting his status. People are tools, opportunities, stepping stones. Everything has a transactional value, but the Sigma female exists outside that system entirely. She isn't a ladder, she isn't a step, and she doesn't occupy any rung in his carefully constructed hierarchy. She doesn't participate in social games or validate the ladders he builds, and that's exactly why she dismantles him. At first, he may try to draw her in, thinking he can leverage her influence or charm for his gain. But she ignores the dynamics he thrives on. She doesn't play roles, she doesn't align herself with power for gain, and she doesn't exist to serve anyone's ambitions. The social climber quickly realizes that his usual tactics, flattery, networking, scheming, have no effect. Every calculated move, every attempt to extract value, meets indifference. The collapse is quiet but brutal. His system of advancement, which depended on others participating in his hierarchical illusions, begins to falter. The ladder he built relies on people validating his ascent. But with her, there's nothing to validate, no role to occupy, no rung to step on. The more he tries to manipulate or involve her, the more irrelevant he becomes. His strategies, once dependable, are suddenly exposed as fragile and meaningless. She doesn't need to confront him or undermine him directly. Her mere existence outside the ladder exposes the futility of his efforts. In her presence, the social climber discovers that power isn't in climbing, it's in sovereignty, authenticity, and self-possession, qualities he cannot co-opt or control. He is left scrambling, frustrated, and increasingly insignificant, while she continues unbothered, untethered, and untouchable. In the end, the social climber isn't destroyed by confrontation or ridicule. He collapses under the weight of a system that cannot contain or leverage her. She teaches, without saying a word, that influence and value cannot be borrowed, stolen, or climbed through. It must be embodied, and hers cannot be touched. Number 12. The ego-dependent man. The ego-dependent man survives on validation. His self-worth is fragile, built entirely on the perception that others, especially women, require him, admire him, or cannot live without him. Every compliment, every sign of need, every subtle acknowledgement fuels his identity. But the Sigma female doesn't need him. She doesn't seek reassurance, approval, or dependency. Her independence is total, and that very fact is a suffocating revelation for someone whose ego is parasitic. At first he may attempt to assert importance, flattery, dominance, or attention-grabbing displays, thinking that if he's persistent enough he can create the dependency he craves. But she refuses to comply. She doesn't fall into the trap. She doesn't perform need, and she certainly doesn't revolve around him. With every failed attempt to elicit dependency, he is reminded that his identity, built on others' need, is meaningless here. The destruction is swift and silent. He begins to spiral, trying harder, projecting more ego-driven energy, all while she remains unshaken, untouchable, and indifferent. No confrontation, no argument, no rejection is necessary. Her very existence outside his orbit is enough to reveal the emptiness of his self-importance. He starts to feel the void at the core of his ego, the lack of real substance, and the futility of measuring himself through others' dependence. By the time he realizes what's happening, he is already diminished. The confidence he carried, the illusions of power he cultivated, crumble under the weight of her autonomy. She doesn't destroy him with aggression or humiliation. She destroys him simply by refusing to need him. In her presence, he experiences a suffocating truth. A man whose ego is dependent on others cannot survive next to someone who embodies complete independence. She doesn't fight, she doesn't dominate, she just exists, and that alone dismantles him entirely. In the presence of a Sigma female, the fragile, performative, and ego-driven personalities of the world find themselves exposed, unraveling, and ultimately powerless. She doesn't need to fight, argue, or prove herself. Her existence alone dismantles pretenders, manipulators, and control-obsessed personalities with quiet inevitability. Each one of the 20 personality types she encounters meets the same fate. Their illusions, strategies, and self-importance crumble because she operates outside the systems they depend on. She doesn't seek to destroy, she simply lives on her own terms, refusing to bend, perform, or validate. And in doing so, she reveals the fragility, emptiness, and limitations of those who thrive on dependency, attention, or control. Her power is not loud, performative, or obvious. It's sovereign, unshakable, and unapologetically authentic. She doesn't need to engage for destruction to occur. She doesn't need to confront for chaos to unfold. Her independence exposes weaknesses. Her silence unmasks pretenders. Her authenticity strips away illusions, and her boundaries leave manipulators empty-handed. For those who have built their lives around control, performance, or dependence, being in her orbit is a reckoning. What makes the Sigma female so extraordinary is that she's untouchable not through aggression, not through domination, and not through manipulation, but through the quiet mastery of herself. She is a force of nature that cannot be caged, measured, or owned, and the fallout for anyone attempting to do so is inevitable. Every personality built on external validation, imitation, or hierarchy finds that their systems collapse, often without them realizing why. In the end, the Sigma female doesn't just survive the world of fragile egos, she exposes it, dismantles it, and leaves nothing but clarity in her wake. To encounter her is to witness authenticity, sovereignty, and self-possession in motion. And for those who depend on illusions, control, or borrowed power, the lesson is unavoidable. You cannot dominate what refuses to be tamed, and you cannot survive the presence of someone who is entirely herself. If you want to keep up with more insights like this and unlock the secrets of Sigma dynamics, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. If this video resonated with you, give it a like, drop a comment with your thoughts, and share it with anyone who needs to see it. Your support helps the channel grow and ensures more content like this reaches the people who can truly benefit from it.